having gone from $1 million per appearance to 50,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, that at the time in when Netflix drops her, Netflix no longer invests in As Ever as well.
And I don't think the reputation is what it used to be.
Correct, yeah.
And I think after Dusseldorf, after Vancouver, and with Birmingham coming up.
An ally of the Sussexes has revealed that not only are visits to the As Ever, or Was Never, as Lady Colin Campbell calls it, website, down.
Something has shifted, and not quietly, not gradually, but violently, like a carefully constructed illusion cracking right down the middle. Because what we are witnessing is not just a dip, not just a moment of bad press, but what insiders are now whispering could be a full-blown collapse of Meghan Markle's carefully curated American image and the silence surrounding it. That might be the loudest clue of all. For years, the United States was framed as her sanctuary, her comeback stage, the place where she would rewrite her narrative on her own terms. But now, the very ground that was supposed to lift her up seems to be slipping beneath her feet, and the numbers are telling a story that no glossy headline can fully hide. Because here's where it gets unsettling. Popularity doesn't just drop 13 points in 6 months without something deeper brewing beneath the surface. That kind of fall isn't random. It's not coincidence. It's a pattern. And patterns, when you follow them closely enough, start to reveal something far more uncomfortable than a simple public relations misstep. They begin to suggest that the image we've been shown might not match the reality behind it.
I feel like perhaps People magazine is now operating on that sort of thing, that Harry and Meghan operate on PR. They need to get stories out there to tell the world that they're doing great, even though everything is quite clearly and obviously crumbling down around them. And the fact that People magazine ignores the actual truth and the evidence that is out there to show that Harry and Meghan are not doing great across any areas, but they continue this manufactured pumping out of these articles, it's like they bought the gold package.
Meghan was liked by 29% and disliked by 27% of respondents in a poll of around 1,300 Americans conducted by YouGov over the first 3 months of 2026, giving her a net rating of +2. The methodology, based on YouGov's rolling rating system, differs from traditional polling in that responses are collected continuously throughout the year and presented in quarterly datasets, providing a more stable measure of sentiment.
And when you dig into the data, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Just months ago, Meghan's numbers were stable, manageable, even promising. A +15 net approval wasn't extraordinary, but it was solid. It was workable. It was the kind of foundation PR teams dream of because it gives them room to build, to shape, to refine. But then suddenly, almost abruptly, that stability tightens into something suffocating. 29% favorable, 27% unfavorable, a net approval of +2. That's not just a decline. That's a warning signal, a flashing red light that something fundamental has changed in how the public is responding. And the question that refuses to go away is, why? What happened between those 2 points? Because public perception doesn't erode like that without pressure, without friction, without something pushing against the narrative from behind the scenes. And yet, strangely, the narrative presented to the public doesn't seem to reflect that pressure at all. Instead, it continues almost unchanged, polished, controlled, relentlessly positive, as if nothing is wrong.
These figures represent a sharp drop from the third quarter of 2025, when Meghan was liked by 37% and disliked by 22% of respondents, giving her a net approval rating of +15. That equates to a 13-point decline over 2 quarters. Now, I just have to tell you, I've been a bit of a sort of student of these YouGov rolling figures over the years, because especially in my previous life and my current life, actually, when you're looking at politicians, it's very important because it tracks the rolling sentiment of how people feel about celebrities or politicians or big names. A drop like that is huge and quick. Like, usually you'll tend to see like maybe up a couple of points, down a couple of points, depending on people, say, have had a big movie out or if they've been involved in a big story. But a 13-point decline over 2 quarters.
But here's where it starts to feel even more unsettling. Analysts aren't calling this normal. They're calling it unusual, highly unusual, because typical fluctuations stay small to maybe 3 points. That's the natural rhythm of public opinion. But a 13-point collapse? That's something else entirely. That's what insiders describe as a reputational emergency. The kind of event that should trigger immediate damage control, aggressive narrative shifts, visible course correction, and yet, where is it? Where is the scramble? Where is the urgency? Instead, what we see is something almost eerie, a kind of calm that doesn't match the storm underneath. And even more striking, this isn't happening in the UK, where critics and tabloids are often blamed for negative perception. No, this is happening in the United States, the safe space, the fresh start, the place that was supposed to be free from the pressures of royal life. So if the decline is happening here, then what exactly is driving it?
This is what like a PR expert would say required a reputational crisis management intervention. The problem is, I think that's been tried so often by Meghan. Royston writes, traffic on Meghan's As Ever website appears to have slowed over the same 3-month period as measured by SimilarWeb. In December, Meghan recorded around 246,000 visitors to the site, of which 108,000 were from the US. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because she's only selling to the US. So it means she's getting well over 100,000 visits that actually are irrelevant to her business proposition. It might be people like me who are looking a bit nosily and saying, oh, ha ha ha, isn't that funny, this latest message or whatever, but they're not buying products. So really, it's only that 108,000 that matter for her in terms.
Even voices that once leaned supportive are starting to shift, quietly at first, subtly but noticeably, because when the data becomes impossible to ignore, even the most carefully maintained narratives begin to crack. And that shift, those small changes in tone, those subtle recalibrations might actually be one of the biggest clues that something deeper is unfolding behind the scenes. But it doesn't stop there, because while public perception is tightening, something else is happening in parallel, and it might be even more revealing. The digital numbers, the traffic, the engagement, the very metrics that quietly measure real interest when no one is watching.
In January, her total number of visits rose to 268,000. But, and this is a huge but, US visits fell to 89,000, indicating that the US traffic declined despite an overall increase in visits. And Meghan, I repeat, is only selling to America, which means that her sort of customer base has actually dipped to 89,000. Remember, the vast majority of those people will not be buying anything. The US is currently the only country she shops to, making the geographic breakdown particularly significant. Meghan has said she plans to take her business global, but has not launched internationally yet. In February, gosh, this gets so much worse, guys. Traffic fell to 213,000 visits internationally, including about 83,500 from the US. So again, the market is just getting smaller and smaller. It recovered slightly in March, 226,000, 94,000 in the US, still under that 100,000 number though. But again, April was disastrous. It tanked. 178,000 overall, but just 61,500 in the US. Now, remember, if you look at the start of the year, she was at 108,000. That's almost a halving of her internet traffic in the US, which is where she is selling to.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, that at the time in when Netflix drops her, Netflix no longer invests in As Ever as well, which has also, I think, impacted all of it. I mean, her one big name that was actually, well, her only partner in this walked away before the year's anniversary was up. So that, of course, definitely damaged it.
And this is where the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss, because traffic doesn't just drop nearly in half without consequences. From over 100,000 visitors down to just over 60,000 in a matter of months, that's not a fluctuation. That's a contraction, a sharp, undeniable pullback that suggests something fundamental is changing in audience behavior. Curiosity fading, engagement slipping, momentum stalling. And here's the uncomfortable part: while the numbers are falling, the media output remains relentless. Dozens upon dozens of glowing features, lifestyle pieces, carefully framed narratives repeating the same themes over and over again. Meghan the visionary, Meghan the devoted mother, Meghan the resilient figure. Again and again, different words, same story. And when repetition becomes that consistent, that polished, that controlled, it starts to raise a different kind of question. Not about what is being shown, but about what might not be. Because when coverage becomes overwhelmingly positive, while measurable indicators move in the opposite direction, a gap begins to form, a disconnect. And in that gap, speculation grows. Are we watching independent reporting or something more carefully managed? Something shaped, guided, refined before it ever reaches the public. And then come the smaller details, the ones that seem insignificant at first but start to feel heavier the more you look at them. The staged kitchen that may not be real. The single outfit turned into a full narrative. The curated glimpses that feel almost too perfect, too consistent. 2, intentional, because in a world where image is everything, control becomes the most valuable currency of all. And the more tightly controlled that image appears, the more people start to wonder what lies just outside the frame. And maybe that's where the real story begins. Not in the headlines, not in the polished features, but in the quiet contradictions. The falling numbers paired with rising praise, the shrinking engagement hidden behind expanding coverage, the subtle shifts that don't quite add up. And just when it seems like the story has reached its breaking point, another layer quietly slides into place, one that shifts the entire narrative from public perception to something far more serious: power, money, and who is willing to stand next to the brand when the lights are no longer flattering. Because while attention is drifting and engagement is shrinking, the real shock comes from somewhere far less emotional and far more calculated: corporate behavior. Because corporations don't react to gossip, they react to risk. And when a giant like Boeing reportedly steps back from a high-profile association, it doesn't happen on impulse. It doesn't happen over headlines. It happens after evaluation, after analysis, after quiet internal discussions about reputation, alignment, and long-term impact. And that's what makes this moment feel different. Because if the association was once considered valuable, then what changed? The answer might lie in a pattern that's becoming harder to ignore. Because it's not just one signal, it's multiple signals stacking on top of each other. Sponsorships thinning, engagement dropping, public perception tightening. And when all of those trends begin to move in the same direction at the same time, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a shift. And nowhere is that shift more visible than in the numbers surrounding the Invictus Games. Once positioned as a powerful, emotionally driven global event, it now finds itself under a different kind of spotlight. Fewer sponsors, lower reported funding, a noticeable gap when compared to previous editions. And suddenly, the conversation isn't just about inspiration anymore, it's about sustainability, about structure, about whether the foundation is as strong as it appears on the surface. Because when comparisons start being drawn, when past events are placed side by side with present ones, the differences become difficult to explain away. More sponsors before, fewer now, larger backing then, tighter numbers today. And in that contrast, questions begin to form. Quiet at first, then louder. Questions about why the momentum seems to be slowing, and questions about what might be influencing those decisions behind closed doors. And then comes the most uncomfortable layer of all, the scrutiny of how things are being run. Because once attention shifts toward finances, toward cost structures, toward allocation, the conversation becomes far less forgiving. Suddenly, every detail matters. Every number feels heavier. Every claim is examined more closely. And when critics start comparing cost per participant to entirely different models operating at a fraction of the expense, the narrative shifts again from admiration to skepticism. Because here's the reality that's starting to circulate. When figures are broken down in certain ways, they don't just raise eyebrows, they raise doubts. Doubts about efficiency, doubts about priorities, doubts about whether the mission is being supported in the way people expect. And once those doubts take hold, they spread quickly because they're rooted in something tangible, something measurable, something that can't simply be reframed with better storytelling. At the same time, another subtle shift is unfolding, one that feels less dramatic on the surface, but might carry just as much weight. The absence, the distance, the quiet separation from moments that once would have been unthinkable to miss. Royal gatherings moving forward without them. Milestones happening elsewhere. And with each of those moments, a visual contrast forms, one side continuing tradition, the other standing apart. And that contrast, it lingers because it feeds into a larger narrative that's been building slowly over time. A narrative about divergence, about two paths moving further and further away from each other. And within that narrative, interpretations begin to harden. Some see independence, others Others see isolation. Some see reinvention, others see detachment. But perhaps the most revealing shift of all isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't come with headlines or breaking alerts. It comes quietly, almost invisibly, in the form of indifference. Because backlash can still be managed. Criticism can still be countered. But indifference is different. It means the audience isn't reacting anymore. It means the emotional connection, the thing that drives engagement, loyalty, curiosity, is starting to fade. And when that happens, everything changes. Because influence isn't built on visibility alone. It's built on connection, on resonance, on the ability to hold attention in a way that feels authentic, evolving, real. And when the audience begins to feel like they've seen it all before, when the narrative starts to feel repetitive, when curiosity turns into familiarity, that's when momentum begins to slow. And that's where the story stands now. Not at a clear ending, not at a definitive collapse, but at a crossroads filled with contradictions, falling numbers paired with persistent praise, shrinking engagement wrapped in polished narratives, corporate caution emerging where enthusiasm once stood. Because something is shifting, quietly, gradually, but unmistakably. And the most unsettling part, no one seems entirely sure where it leads next.